Okay, so think about this for a second. You've got, say, a CEO sitting in Mumbai,
Right.
and they're making the big decisions about products for, folks right here in the U.S.
It does make you pause, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is a pretty big question. We're seeing definitely more Indian executives taking the top jobs at major Western brands.
It's a noticeable trend.
So today, we're diving into a source that, well, doesn't exactly mince words. It asks, is this actually becoming a problem? Are there real downsides for regular consumers that maybe we should be looking at?
Exactly. And the source we're looking at is HiddenTruthTales, the Indian Hiring Wave Episode 4. Specifically, the title is Why Indian CEOs Are Killing Western Brands, the Data-Driven Disaster.
Wow, okay. So direct.
Very direct. And it's, important to state up front, this source has a really forceful perspective. It uses some, let's say, strong language.
Okay.
Talking about potential cultural gaps, maybe an over-focus on cost-cutting instead of cultural understanding.
Right. So listeners should know that going in, it's an assertive take.
Yeah. Definitely. Keep that viewpoint in mind as we explore it.
Yeah, and our aim here isn't to, agree or disagree with the source.
No, not at all.
It's really just to unpack the arguments, look at the examples they give. We want to understand what they're claiming and, why they think it matters to you, the person actually using these brands.
Precisely. To help listeners make sense of this particular viewpoint.
Okay, let's get into it then. The source kicks off with a section called The Great CEO Scam. What's the basic idea there?
Well, the core claim is that this rise in Indian execs isn't necessarily about finding the absolute best fit for the Western market.
Okay. So what is it about, according to them?
The source argues it's heavily driven by cost cutting, that boards might be prioritizing executives who perhaps come with a lower price tag.
And potentially overlooking candidates with maybe a deeper, more intuitive grasp of the local culture.
That's the allegation, yes. That cost becomes the primary factor, potentially over cultural fluency.
And to back this up, to show this alleged lack of cultural insight, they bring up some big names, right? And some pretty big numbers.
They do. It points straight to Disney's recent box office struggles.
Mm-hmm.
And also the huge hit Bud Light took. The source puts that figure around $27 billion in lost value.
Wow. And the source directly links that financial impact to the leadership.
Yes. The argument presented is that these results are essentially fallout from leadership not having that deep sort of cultural connection with American consumers.
Right. So the idea is maybe they're brilliant managers, but perhaps missing some nuances of the U.S. market.
That's the line of argument.
But it goes deeper than just cultural familiarity, doesn't it? There's a criticism about how they make decisions.
Yes. The source calls it the data over instinct problem. Or disaster, I think they use.
Data over instinct. Okay.
The idea is that these leaders are perhaps portrayed as relying maybe too much on algorithms, spreadsheets, data analysis.
And not enough on
the gut feelings, the lived experience, the kind of intuition that helps understand brand loyalty beyond just numbers.
So data tells you what happened, but maybe not always why on an emotional level?
That's the criticism being leveled, yes. That data can miss the human connection.
Okay, and then there's this other term they use, the Indian mafia effect. That sounds charged.
It is. It's very strong language. This refers to the claim, the allegation, that once an Indian CEO is in place, there's a tendency, according to the source, to hire heavily within their own existing networks.
Potentially locking out local talent or different perspectives.
That's the implication presented, that it could create a kind of echo chamber at the top, potentially further distancing leadership from the customer base on the ground.
It's a serious claim. And they really drive this point home with a very specific, almost personal question, don't they?
They do. It's quite pointed. The source asks, basically, Satya Nadella doesn't know what it's like to be a black single mom in Chicago, so why is he deciding what text she gets?
Oof. Yeah, that really crystallizes their argument about lived experience or the alleged lack thereof at the very top.
It sums up that core concern about a potential disconnect between the leadership's background and the diverse experiences of their customers.
Okay, so that sets the stage. Leadership might be disconnected, focused on data, potentially hiring within networks. Now, how does this supposedly hit the average consumer? The next bit is the consumer collapse.
Right.
Let's start with Silicon Valley. What's the issue there, according to the source?
The main point is about customer support. The source claims that Indian CEOs in tech are aggressively pushing towards automation, replacing human agents with bots.
Okay, which saves money, presumably.
Presumably, yes.
Yeah.
But the source argues it leads to massive frustration for users.
I think we can all relate to that sometime.
Right, especially the source notes for maybe older users who find these systems harder to deal with or just prefer, talking to an actual person.
An endless phone tree feeling.
Yeah.
Okay, what about retail? Any specific examples?
In retail, the argument is that companies led by Indian execs are accused of ignoring specific local tastes.
How so?
By pushing more globalized products, things that are meant to sell everywhere but maybe don't really resonate strongly in any one particular market.
So like less regional specialization, more one-size-fits-all.
That's the critique, a kind of standardization that the source argues misses the mark with local consumers who want products reflecting their specific needs or culture.
Okay. And then Hollywood. This one feels potentially controversial. What's the claim?
Yeah, this is definitely a hot button one. The source argues that Indian executives in Hollywood are the ones greenlighting, quote, woke scripts.
Oh, woke scripts. Okay.
And that these scripts are then failing commercially. The source alleges it's because these executives are misjudging the preferences of both white and black audiences in America.
So it's tying creative choices and box office results directly to the background of the executives making the decisions.
Very directly, yes. It's presented as a failure to understand the audience, leading to financial underperformance. It's quite a subjective claim linking demographics to taste.
And they even suggest including a sort of anecdote to illustrate this, right? Like a real-world complaint.
Yeah, the source text suggests using a hypothetical like a Reddit comment, someone from Texas maybe, complaining about AI customer service.
Yeah.
For a mortgage company, say, run by an Indian CEO, and the AI just doesn't understand a Southern accent.
Ah, I see. To make that feeling of not being understood very concrete for the listener, does this ring true for you, the listener? That kind of experience.
It's meant to illustrate that feeling of disconnect, that frustration the source claims is growing.
Okay, so we have examples across tech, retail, entertainment, all pointing towards this alleged leadership disconnect causing problems for consumers. This leads into the next section. The death spiral. Sounds ominous.
It does.
What are the bigger long-term worries being raised here?
The argument broadens out here. The source claims these trends, the cultural gap, the consumer frustration aren't just isolated issues. They have wider negative effects.
For the companies themselves and the economy.
Exactly. The idea put forward is that brands fundamentally lose touch with the people buying their products.
And the consequence.
Well, according to the source, this can lead to declining sales, even bankruptcies, and it creates an opening.
An opening for whom?
For competitors, potentially foreign ones who maybe do have a better handle on the local market, allowing them to gain ground.
And is there another specific example used here to show this cultural mismatch leading to lost sales?
Yes, the source uses Netflix. It claims that Netflix's push into specifically India-focused content hasn't really caught on significantly in the American market.
Interesting.
The argument is that content made for one cultural context just doesn't automatically work in another, leading to, potentially wasted resources and missed targets in the U.S.
This seems related to something else. The source mentions an outsourcing trap. What do they mean by that?
Right, the outsourcing trap. The idea here is that the constant drive for cost savings leads companies to rely more and more on cheaper labor, often in places like India.
Okay, for things like call centers, we know that.
But the source argues it goes beyond that this reliance influences product design, service development.
How so?
Well, the claim is that if the people developing the products or services lack that deep cultural understanding of the target market, it gets baked into the offerings themselves.
Ah, so the lack of cultural understanding isn't just in the marketing, it's in the product itself.
That's the argument. And this, in turn, further alienates the Western customer base. It's presented as a kind of negative cycle.
Started by cost-cutting, ending in consumer alienation.
Precisely. That's the trap, as the source describes it.
And there's another one of those really strong quotes in this section, too, isn't there? Capturing the essence of this concern.
Yes, there is. The quote used is, "They turned Apple into a spreadsheet company. No soul, no culture, just profit margins."
That's blunt.
It really encapsulates the core fear presented in the source, that this focus on efficiency and data, allegedly driven by this leadership trend, is stripping away the brand identity, the cultural resonance that made companies successful in the first place.
It's certainly a bleak picture the source paints.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the final main section. The solution, or is it too late? What does the source propose doing about all this?
Well, the proposed solutions are pretty much as direct as the criticisms. They're framed as calls to action.
Okay, like what?
First, it suggests essentially forcing company boards to prioritize hiring CEOs who genuinely understand their main consumer base.
Instead of
focusing solely on, say, having an MBA or just being the cheapest viable option, it's a call to value cultural insight in leadership selection.
That would be a major shift in how many boards operate, I imagine. What else?
Second, there's a call directly to consumers.
To do what?
To boycott brands they feel are run by executives who are culturally clueless, as the source puts it.
Using consumer power to force change.
Exactly. Applying economic pressure from the bottom up.
Okay. And then there's a point about AI, artificial intelligence, right? How does that fit in?
Yes. The source raises a concern here. It suggests that the push towards AI, which it partly associates with Indian-led tech firms focused on automation,
might make things worse.
Could potentially exacerbate the problem, yes. By further reducing the human element, the human judgment, the understanding in the interactions between companies and customers.
Replacing human interaction with code, basically.
That's the fear expressed.
And this section wraps up with a pretty provocative question for the listener, doesn't it?
It does. It leaves the listener to ponder. Should Western companies be required to have leadership that mirrors their customer base?
Wow. That opens up a whole other set of complex issues. Representation, qualifications, the purpose of a corporation.
Absolutely. It's meant to be a thought-provoking question about leadership and cultural alignment in our globalized world.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. We've gone through this deep dive into Hidden Truth Tales, and it presents a very defined perspective.
Yeah.
Could you just recap the main thrust of their argument?
Sure. So the source essentially argues that the increase in Indian CEOs in the West is mainly about saving costs, not necessarily about market fit.
Right.
It claims this leads to problems, cultural disconnects, poor decisions like backing unsuccessful movies or alienating customers with bots or unwanted products, significant financial losses for brands like Bud Light.
A whole range of negative consequences.
Yes. And it uses really strong terms throughout, things like corporate colonization, cultural sabotage, demographic betrayal.
And it names names, too.
It does. It mentions people like Parag Agrawal, who is CEO at Twitter, and Lena Nair at Chanel, using them as examples within its overall narrative.
Okay, definitely a viewpoint that's delivered with a lot of force.
No question about that.
And again, for everyone listening, it's crucial to remember this deep dive was about presenting and understanding the specific arguments and claims made within this particular source.
Exactly. We're reporting on the perspective offered in this material.
And really thinking about these points, it does make you reflect, doesn't it? On that whole complex dance between who leads a company, how well they understand their customers, and what consumers actually want and value in today's market.
It certainly does. It raises fundamental questions about leadership, culture, and commerce, and how they intersect, or perhaps how they sometimes collide. It definitely leaves you with things to think about regarding